it's scary. It can be really scary, especially when we're talking about depression, when we're talking about suicidal ideation, when we're talking about anxiety. It's terrifying as a parent because you want to protect your kid. But one of the things I tell them is we can't panic because if we panic, our youth panics.
Welcome to the Generation Youth Podcast. I'm your host, James McLamb. I'm here with a new friend, Zion Givens, from way out in the desert Southwest. Welcome to the show, Zion.
Yo, appreciate it, James. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm excited for us to connect. Excited for us to be able to do some things and collaborate on some projects. There's a lot of synergy in what your mission is and what we try to do with our different organizations. And so I'm excited at that. But I tell you what, our audience would love to hear more about you and love to hear some about you before we dive into some in-depth topics that they want to hear us talk about. And they would rather hear from you than me. They get tired of hearing my accent. So let's throw out another accent today instead. So if you wouldn't mind, Z, introduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah, no problem. You know what? Before I even get to my introduction, I got to say to the audience that's listening, man, James has been super patient with me, man. It's been been amazing. The amount of rescheduling that I had to do to get on this podcast and him being like, all right, we're going to roll with it. James, I really do appreciate you taking the time out to have me on the pod.
It's very kind of you to say that. Thank you.
No, of course. But for the listeners that are listening now, yeah, my name is Zion Z Givens. I go by Z out here in the community. Born and raised in the sunny side of Tucson, Arizona. Now living out here in Phoenix.
Is there a cloudy side of Tucson, Arizona?
Oh, man, I wish there was, man. I wish there was. But, you know, we got sun. I think it was something crazy stat about, like, we get 265 days of sun, like, or even more. I think 300 days of sun. It's amazing. I like it.
Wow.
It's good for my mental health, so I'll take it any time of the day. But I'm the co-founder and the presenter of Up to It. Is an organization that me and my father started about in January, but we've been talking about it for quite some time. I think all my whole life. My father's I'm a second generation prevention specialist. My dad is the founder. He's been in the nonprofit world for about 20 plus years, working in prevention and behavioral health. And man, just that's a whole nother side of we can dive into that if that's what you want to dive into. But that's how I got into the work that I'm doing now.
So when we talked before, you got several things that you go to and speak to youth on, but one of the things that seems to be on your heart is really helping them with their mental health. That is a topic that is very much at the forefront of those who work with youth and parents' minds, especially post-COVID. People are really talking a lot about that. But I've discovered doing this podcast and talking with the friends in our area in this arena that mental health problems with youth mean different things to different people.
For sure.
What it means to somebody here may not be the same. So just so that we're talking about, what do you see in your experiences as the major problem under this umbrella and that you feel passionate about and called to help with? So what are you observing? What do you see?
Yeah, I think one of the big things that I'm observing now is maybe I always say self-advocacy. That's what I really talk about in my presentations, of having youth be an advocate of themselves, knowing when they're going through a struggle to reach out for help. Because I think there's this stigma, I know there's this stigma out here that asking for help is weak, is a sign of weakness, or you're soft for asking for help, especially as young men, right? You know, we're seeing a higher rates of suicide with our young men. And it has to do with that stigma of a man just pulls himself up by the bootstraps and gets it done and doesn't ask for help. He bottles up his emotions and whatnot. So it's that idea of eliminating that stigma, letting young people know that asking for help is the strongest thing somebody could do. I mean, we're not put on this earth to navigate it by ourselves and our lonesome. We're here to be in community with one another. We're here to help uplift each other. But my favorite thing to tell youth is that we can't help you. The adults in the room cannot help you if we don't know what's going on. So taking time out to when that teacher, when that mentor, when that coach sees that your vibe is a little off or sees something's kind of off, take advantage of that opportunity when they pull you aside for that private conversation and be like, hey, you know, I noticed that you haven't really been yourself lately. Is everything going all right? And that's a chance for that connection for that youth to be like, you know what? This adult is seeing me and it wants to hear me. I should use that as an opportunity to share what's going on. So I share my story with youth about how that was hard for me, because it is hard. It's not easy at all, but it is possible. Even though it's not easy, even though it's hard, it is possible. And there's a lot more benefits that come with that. So that's what I'm seeing a lot of, is this self advocacy not being really present with these youth, and not
Mhm.
really being championed amongst the adults, saying that you need to be a self advocate.
Well, how do they know when they need to do that? How can a young person, late teens, maybe into college, which is probably even a bigger area that it tends to rise itself into, how do they know when there's something that is a struggle mentally that they need some help with, or I'm just having a rough day? You understand what I'm saying? Because
Yeah.
I think there's some of that, oh, when they'll go to folks saying, oh, you're just having a rough day. And so they just brush it off because I'll be
Mm.
better tomorrow. But what are the signs that they need to be looking for in their own life, so that they know that this is something I need some help with?
Yeah, and that's completely valid. I like how you brought up, like, even having bad days, right? Like, where do I tell the difference between having a bad day versus if I'm struggling with my mental health and having a mental health challenge or maybe a crisis? But I think both, it's not a or question, it's an and question, right? It's,
Hmm.
I can feel this and still ask for help even when I'm having rough days and when I feel like I'm having mental health crisis or mental health struggle, because it starts with those bad days. If I'm going to an adult on a bad day and saying, hey, you know what? I'm having a bad day. And us as the adults, like, oh, well, you know what? Yeah, you're having a bad day. It's okay. Like, oh, brush it off, rather than having those intimate conversations of like, oh, well, tell me about it. Like, what was bad about it? What was something that didn't go your way? What are some ways? And that, as in, I say, I put it a lot on the youth, but it's also us as the adults, that we have to
Yeah.
be aware of how we are coming across to these youth. So let them know that when you are feeling a bad day, that you can come to me. When you're having your worst day in the world, that you can still come to me. When you're having the best day in the world, you can still come to me. So I think it's an and question, but when it's really delayed and you're not talking to somebody, even when you are having bad days, and it builds itself up into a mental health crisis or a mental health challenge, the signs that I tell youth to look out for is feeling sad or down for a period of time. And I've been surprised by how many youth are so aware of that. I asked that question in my conversation. I'm like, so what does a period of time look like? And youth will,
Yeah, that was going to be my next question.
yeah.
Okay, how do I know this? If I'm sad and depressed, is there a reason? Or is
Mhm.
it something that is deeper?
Yeah,
When I say reason, there's always a reason. That was not good language there. You know what I'm talking about? Is there something that caused it?
for sure.
or is it something that's deeper that's causing me not to be able to see any kind of hope at all?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're right. That's the question that I pose to the youth, is like, what is a period of time in your eyes? And youth will
Yeah.
say maybe a month, maybe 3 months, maybe 2 months, maybe a couple days. But just doing the research and prevention and working with just mental health organizations as a whole, the recommended amount of time is 2 to 3 weeks, right? 2 or more weeks. If somebody's feeling sad or down for 2 or more weeks, it's time to ask for help. And I tell youth, because what happens in their brain is like, well, I need to feel sad or down for consecutive amount of time. So like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I have to feel down for the whole week. But that's not what it is. It could be a fluctuation, right? Monday, Tuesday. So I always use this baseline model, right? So we have this baseline in our emotions and our feelings and whatnot. And when we're feeling below baseline, so let's say on Monday, we're not feeling at our baseline, we're feeling below. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we're feeling this below our baseline. But then on Thursday, we kind of have a good day and we're back a little bit above our baseline. And now we're like, okay, well, I'm feeling a little bit better today, but Friday comes around and we're even below our baseline. And you're allowed to fluctuate. That's what emotions do. But when you're feeling that fluctuation 2 or more weeks and consistently feeling in that sad or down period for like 3 or 4 days out of those, maybe I'll say like 8 days out of that 2 week span, I would definitely recommend youth to ask for help.
So how would they identify what that feeling is like? Because
Yeah.
I'm thinking about my own experience, and I might feel down for 2 or 3 days,
Yeah.
and it might be a result of, man, I really blew that tryout, or that
Mhm.
game didn't go my way, or I had an argument with my best friend, or or a girlfriend, which are just any kind of a relationship for a youth could draw them into, versus something deeper. So
Right.
how do they identify that it's just not a temporal feeling versus something that maybe is a little bit more systemic?
Yeah, I hear that a lot. Like, going back to the first question you asked about, like, is it an or an and question? And when we're
Mm,
talking about these mental health in general, it's not linear. You're gonna have some bad days, you're gonna have some unhealthy days, you're gonna have great days, you're gonna have worse days. But when we're feeling sad or down for a period of time about something, I'd rather have those conversations with somebody or a coping skill that we can develop. So when I'm thinking about, like, when we're talking about an exam, for me, academically, I was trying to be the best student that I could be. So when I got a hit on my exam, maybe an F or a C or a D, that hit me harder than it would maybe another peer who was like, you know what, like, I'm just here to get a passing grade, whatever, whatever, because both are valid. But it might affect me more than that other person or that other peer. So understanding where you are at as a person, and that's hard, right? As a teenager, like,
yeah.
what are our values? Where do they lie? Who are we? Right? Like, that's the biggest question we're trying to solve in this awesome thing called life, is who we are and who we want to become. But to answer your question, it's really about what makes you feel that way. And if it's big enough for you to feel a certain way, it's big enough to go talk to someone about it, right?
Mm.
There's no reason because what I notice with young people is they like to compare traumas to one another or compare
Yeah,
challenges.
you know,
That
that's funny you said that because I just had a conversation with somebody, maybe Nathan and I
Yeah,
talking, Nathan Ray, who
Nathan.
we just interviewed recently, and I talking about how the youth sometimes, even if they do not have these trauma experiences, they feel like they need to invent something to compete and compare.
Right.
That's kind of about a decade old phenomenon. It's relatively new, widespread. There's
Right,
always
right,
been a
right.
little bit of that, but widespread now. Hey, I've had this traumatic experience in my life, and people are like, "No, you didn't," and then they feel left out if they don't.
Yeah,
Mm,
exactly. So this constant comparison of traumas or just challenges in general. I won't even say traumas, just challenges in general, where we always say somebody out there has it worse. That's how we kind of respond to some of our youth about some of these things, like, why are you so mad about this, that, and the other? Like, somebody out there has it worse than you. And that is true, right? That is true. Somebody out there is obviously gonna have it worse than you. But in your life right now, this is affecting you to the point where you are maybe on the verge of a mental health crisis or a mental health challenge. So when we're talking about that, if it's big enough for you to feel some type of way about it, it's big enough to go talk to somebody about it who cares and will listen, right? So
mm.
that's what I would say when we're talking about those things, that constant comparison, that it doesn't really do anybody any good, to be honest, to compare traumas or challenges to anything, because we're not living the same life, so to speak, in different perspectives. We're in different realms, maybe different realities, some of us. But when we're talking about this, I think it's good to remind people that we can't compare. We can only feel what we feel and cope with what knowledge that we have.
You know, one of the things that you said earlier that made me think is when you said they need those coping skills. The first thing that came to my mind when you said that is that so many young people that I've encountered,
Mm-hmm.
especially as of the last decade or so, feel like that they are coping, but that they have developed their own coping mechanisms or their own coping ways
Yeah.
that in reality are kind of negative or contributing to the problem. Do you see that? Do you see that as well? Well,
Yeah.
so since we are both on the same board in this, let's speak to the audience and say, hey, these are some of those negative things that we see youth are using to cope with these problems that are not helping.
Yeah.
And the reason I thought about this is that maybe somebody out there is listening and they think I got this all under control. And if we can kind of show them this is some negative ways people have been coping in the past, maybe it can open them eyes to look and seek some help. So,
Yeah.
what
No.
you got anything? That was a question I had no idea I was going to ask that, but it's out of the blue. So, you got anything for me?
Oh, big time. Big time. I think one of the biggest ones that we're seeing or hearing often, and this is a phenomenon that goes way back when, right? Is substance misuse, right?
Ooh,
Alcohol, marijuana, pills, all these substances that youth are using to we call it self-medicating in the field, right? Is they're self-medicating to maybe cope with something that they're going through. That's one of the biggest that are unhealthy. Another one that I see is isolation, right? Isolation, social isolation. And one of the things that I see a lot of is that isolation looks like gaming for long periods of times these days in 2000 in the 2020s, right? Is we're seeing a lot of youth revert to gaming, which is cool in moderation. I agree. It's a great tool. I love playing video games as well, and they have their own communities and groups on there. But when you don't have that social connectedness in person, you're missing out on a
exactly.
huge fundamental layer of development when we're talking about youth, right? They need to have these encounters socially in person rather than online. So I think isolation as a whole, when we talk about gaming, when we talk about not spending time with people outside of our home. Another one that I see a lot of is self-harm, right? Self-harm. And what self-harm people typically think of, and this might a trigger warning for anybody here, right? Is it can look like self-injury, it could look like cutting themselves. But another big one that we see is taking risk, unhealthy risk, not calculated risk, and putting themselves in unhealthy situations, because that is a form of self-harm, and they're constantly doing it. That is a negative way to cope, right? And that could look like we talk about cutting, harming ourselves, but also doing risky behavior that is like puts their life in jeopardy, right? That's what I'm thinking of. Those are the big three that I think of. There might be some other underlying ones that a lot of other professionals know, and I'll be sure to make sure that I come out share those as well. But those are the ones that I can think of right now.
I totally agree with that. I think one of them too, a coping mechanism that sounds positive,
Hmm.
but I think it could contribute to negative is confiding and seeking help with someone who is in the same boat and has no understanding of how to get out of. It's like two people fall in a hole and they're looking to each other to help them get out of the hole, and they don't know how to get out. Neither one of them knows how to get out, but they're hey, I'm in a hole. You're in a hole. We're in a hole together. Okay, now I feel better because I've talked to you about being in a hole. Or either one of you going to get out? Well, I don't know
Right.
how to get out. So
That's
instead of
so
calling for someone who to help them out of the hole, they're just talking about it.
That's so good. And most of these that group of people is usually their friends, right? Or their
Hmm.
peers, where I always tell the youth, friends are great. I'm glad that you have so many friends, or maybe two or three friends that you can count on. I think you need those people in your life. You need them. I don't think I know you need those people in your life. But when we're talking about something this big, like you said, when we're talking about our emotions, we're talking about these things, and we're both going through the same thing, and we're trying to get guidance and we're trying to get advice from each other, it doesn't work. That it just keeps us in that hole a little bit longer. But if we find out a trusted adult or a professional that knows how to navigate those spaces, that's been through it, that's seen the other side, it's more beneficial for them in the long run. But it's hard for them to get to that point, right? Because as adults, we maybe have harmed that relationship by because we
Yeah.
as adults sometimes we are blabbermouths. We talk to our families about what's happening with our daughter and our son. We talk about to our cousins, our nephews, whatever, right? And they lose that trust within us. They lose that trust because now their whole family knows about what's going on. So it's us as the adults that have to remember that we have to cherish this relationship. If we want to be in their lives, we have to make sure that we're protecting their lives and their not secrets, but their things that they're going through or their challenges, unless they're ready to talk about it openly.
You just hit on a great point is losing that confidentiality
Hmm.
as a trusted adult and as parents, that's a fine line
It
because
is.
you want to give that trust. You want to earn that trust. You want to make sure that they believe in that they confide in you. But at
Hmm.
the same time, parents can't hold that burden on their own. They've got to have their network to
So
support them
true.
as well. So that's this is like one of those juggling acts where you've seen those jugglers, that those really great ones, and they're doing chainsaws and knives. And I'm
Yeah.
always thinking, man, if they hit that thing wrong, they're going to lose an arm. This is kind of
Yeah.
what you're doing. You're juggling chainsaws, and
Mm.
you've not even been trained, and you're just trying to keep from getting cut and not drop the things at the same time. So
So good.
that's hard, man.
It
That's
is.
hard.
And I admire those parents because I mean I grew up in a prevention household, so my dad kind of knew these things that were happening. My mom just kind of was on board with it. But one of the things I admired about my father and my mom was that they allowed for me to have other adult mentors in my life,
Yes.
and they allowed space for me to not. I guess I'll say this because I think adults are afraid of being letting their kids be parented by other adults, but that's kind of what they did for me. Was I had a basketball coach, right? Marvin Beckwith, my AAU basketball coach. When I was out on tournaments, I was his son. This is hey, whatever Marvin
Yeah.
says goes. Like that's how it went, and we had a relationship. My history teacher, my social studies teacher in my senior year of high school, he taught me how to be an official on basketball. Like I was a basketball official for high school, and that was our relationship. But he's also one of my mentors. But one of the things I noticed my parents didn't get mad about it was that they're stealing my connection from my son with I should be having these conversations. But that's the hard part about it is that we need a we idea, right? And I think a
Mhm.
lot of parents are afraid to let other adults into their youth lives because they're not going to teach them the way that they would teach them or that they
Yeah,
would
that's
want
so
to.
wrong.
It
That
is.
is so wrong. That is so wrong. I was intentional as my son, who's 21 now, was growing up. Now I was his coach, his baseball coach on most of the teams he was on. Even in school, I was an assistant coach. They asked me to help, but I purposely thought for other things that he would be involved with to have positive role models pour into his life.
Mhm.
Like in Scouts, when he joined Scouts. Immediately they came to you and they find out your background in youth. They're like, "Oh, you'd be perfect for this," and I'm like, "No." And they're like, "Why not? This is right up your alley. You were a scout too." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know, but no." And they were
Mm.
like, "Why?" And it's like, because he needs some place for people to pour into him that are not dad all the time.
Yes.
And on
Yeah.
one of his teams that he was on for many years, kind of like the travel teams concept, but we were a competitive team.
Yeah.
There were three coaches, and all three of us had our sons on the team. We made a pact as coaches not to coach our sons.
That's so good.
I was the head coach and they were two assistants, but we made the pact. All right, I'm not going to coach my son. You don't coach if your son has a problem, if your son has a skill issue, if they have an attitude problem, you see it, come to one of us and say, I'm
Mm.
seeing this. Can you handle it with them so that we don't create that conflict on the stage and stuff? But
Yes.
but you're right about it. It's a heavy thing to be able to do this.
It is. It's not easy at all. It's not easy, and I
No.
don't wanna paint that picture that it is easy, 'cause that's your
And
baby. That's
parents,
your
our generation, probably your dads and mine,
yeah.
that are not trained or understand these things, we don't quite understand what's happening.
Right. And I don't know, James, I mean, I wanna shout out a book, I think maybe you talked about it, is, The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Hyatt.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. You got that?
yeah. I was,
Looking for it.
keep talking.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
If
No,
you're watching, I'll be right back. Keep talking.
it was so good, man, and me and my father just did a podcast on it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so good, and I recommend that every parent who has a young person in their life, just read that book. I think it was a great illustration of what did happen post
Yes.
2010, right? 2010, where the iPhone came out, social media came out. We didn't understand the unintended consequences of giving screen time to young people at such a young age and social media accounts, and he just goes in on it so well.
Well, youth are only responding to the world that we created for them.
Yep.
And we created them a world that we thought was going to be a gift, that we
Right.
thought was going to elevate them to places they've never been before because we saw the potential of all this stuff.
Yes.
What we did not see, what we maybe, I don't know that we could have foreseen the long-term aspects of it is how much damage it's doing.
Yeah.
Uh, for a new drug, it'll spend years in a pipeline being tested to kind of see what the long term effects are.
Mhm.
They won't do that very quickly, but yet we just dumped it out as quick as we could. And then we gave it to them and said, hey, here it is. Go for it.
Right. Right.
They're
And
just
it's,
responding.
yeah, it was crazy, because I grew up in that. I think I was the last generation where I could still go outside and play with
Hmm.
other neighborhood kids. Like, there was other kids in my neighborhood that were a little bit older than me, a little bit younger than me, but we all got along and rode along in our bikes. And the reason why I bring this up is because of that idea of, now when I'm looking outside my window of my neighborhood. There's kids out there in this neighborhood, but I don't see them like we were back in the day. And oh man, I sound so old. We back in the day, we were riding our bikes and we were going on when the street lights were on and whatnot. And even though I'm saying back in my day, those were moments where parents trusted their youth to make the right decision, but they also trusted those adults in those communities to call them out when they needed to be called out, to also help them out when they needed to be helped out. And that was, and Jonathan Hyatt put it really, really well, was we live in the safest generation. We get it's magnified right now because we see all the bad things on social media, right? Because the 24/7 news cycle is pumping out all of these things. So we're seeing it more in a microscopic lens. But in the grand scheme of things, this is probably one of the safest generations for your youth to be out here in public and doing
And
those
see,
type
that's so hard to convince parents of today.
it is.
Even this lady that I have been married to for 32 years, who lives with somebody who talks about this, it is hard for her. Our youngest is 14, and it's hard for her to still say, hey, you got to let them go. You got
Yeah.
to let them go out and play. Well, I don't want her to walk the dog around the neighborhood too far. She might be picked up by somebody. It's like,
Mm,
in our neighborhood? I
right.
mean, it
But
was like, she said, "Well, you lived in the country, it was safer." I was like, "Yeah, I lived in the country and it was more isolated. You could be gone for hours and nobody know where you are or.
yeah.
You're right. You are so right. It's a safer time
And
for
those,
going through this.
to piggyback on what you were saying about those, being picked up and those that kind of ideologies, things. I mean, that's not just for your wife as well, but also just other people right there, right? In their parenting, is that most of these crimes that are now taking place are taking place on your children's phones, right?
Hmm.
These are taking place in your home where you think they're safe. This is where it's happening. So you have to let
Yeah.
them go. And that the reason why we bring this up, right, when we talk about this parenting is that giving them trust, right? And trusting within them to know that they can be, because that's what we're doing as adults in this world, is we're preparing our youth to be adults. And we have to prepare them for the world that you, like you said, that we created for them, but for them to also create the world that they want to see for their future youth and their future children in their lives. So yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly. Wholeheartedly.
So how does a parent or any adult that's working with youth, how do they get them to trust them enough
Yeah.
to share? Because we know they need to express it.
Yes. That
And we won't even go into what do we do when they share with this. Let's
right.
just get them to share. And then we can, give them a quick synopsis of what to do if they find out the things. But how do we get them to share?
Yeah, no, I think this is a great question. I think a lot of parents struggle with, or even guardians struggle with this question as well. Is where do I start? Z, where do I
Hmm.
start?
Yeah, what is step one? Give me
Yeah,
step one.
the great thing about this is me and my dad do this presentation called Conversations That Connect, geared towards the adults in the room, geared for anybody that has youth in their life. And what we share with them is being an up to it adult, right? Being up to it. And our whole motto, man, is tough conversations for stronger connections. We need to lean into some tough and uncomfortable conversations. But before we can even get to those tough conversations, we need to have fun. One of the
Hmm.
things we need to do is have fun with our youth. And it's funny because when I think back to elementary school, right? All the parents in elementary school, even today, know their friends or their kids' best friends. They know their hobbies that they're into. They know their friends' parents and what they do for a living and whatnot. And this is elementary. So I'm thinking K through 5. Parents are really, really involved in their kids' life. But then in sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, we see them kind of take more of a back seat, like a back seat that I think is too far back, to where there was a point in the presentation I was giving a son, oh actually a daughter, and her parents came up to us after a presentation and said, well, you know what, like Susie here, little Susie, she loves soccer and she's been playing soccer for so long. And this is the dad talking to us, and she's so good at soccer. And Susie looks at her dad kind of like perplexed and puzzled, and she goes, Dad, I stopped playing soccer like 6 months ago. And it's crazy, right? And that disconnect is there because some parents in their lives think that, oh, my son or daughter is so good at this thing and that they're going to be doing it forever and whatever, that they forget to check in with their youth about, what are you passionate about? What do you love? What do you love to do? What do you like to do with me? Like, can we go out for ice cream? Can we go out and watch a movie? Can we go out, and we call them like family dates, right? That's, my mom used to take me to the Cheesecake Factory. That was one of the things that we did. And I looked forward to those moments with my mom for those connectedness. My dad, we go out to U of A basketball game and watch the U of A basketball. Like, and those moments, those intimate moments I had where we weren't talking about deep things. We were just talking about, for me, sports, basketball. How do you feel about this team? How do you feel about this player? How do you feel about your middle school team? How do you feel about these? It starts there. It starts with the small conversations that are fun in a
Hmm.
way that isn't so daunting. Because what I notice a lot of parents love to do is they love to have those deep conversations in face, one on one, eye to eye, where that's intimidating for a youth to be eye to eye, having some of these deep conversations. And tell me what's wrong. What are we going? What are we doing? And it's overwhelming. But one of the things we notice in the field is that if you're doing something, like especially for young men, if I don't know, I don't work on cars, I'm not a mechanic, but this is like the example that we love to give, is that when you work on a car with your son or daughter, if they're into mechanics, and you're having some of these conversations, that they're more inclined to share more with you because it's less daunting, because we're actually focusing on this task at hand rather
Yeah.
than being eye to eye looking at what we're doing, you know what I'm saying? So for me, it was a conversation in the truck. Like, so these small conversations led to bigger conversations. But in these bigger conversations that were a little bit more serious, that were a little bit more intense, would take place in my dad's truck, because my dad would be the kind of one that had these tough conversations with me. And when you think about tough conversations, I'm talking about drugs and alcohol. When we talk
Yeah.
about where our stance was on there, talking about sex, that was one of the things that parents get a little riled up about. Like, not, we don't talk about that, but my dad made sure that we talked about it. What does that mean? What does it look like? All this stuff. We talked about our body types, right? Like as a young man growing and going through puberty, we had these awkward, tough conversations, but they always took place in the car, in the truck. And the reason why that was my dad was driving, focused on driving, and I was in the back seat. And I didn't have to make eye contact with my dad. I saw the back of his head, but in his rear view mirror, right, he could look up and he can see him. And it felt less intimidating and less awkward to have those conversations with him because there was still some level, I felt like it was privacy. It was
Yeah.
privacy. So that's what I share with adults. And that's what me and my dad share is that it starts small. It starts with fun conversations. It starts with fun activities. It starts by doing that, building that trust, and then leaning into, hey, what are your thoughts on this? Can I tell you about what I think? Can I tell you as a parent how I feel about what's going on with this, that, and the third? Because if you're not having these conversations with your youth, somebody else is. And that
That's
somebody
exactly
isn't
right.
really a
Yeah.
somebody, it's a something, right? It's the social media aspect of
Yeah.
things. So be the one to have these conversations.
You are so right. If we're not having those conversations, they're having them somewhere. And there
Mhm.
someone is pouring into them. If we're leaving their cup empty and they're thirsty for something, they're going to get refreshment from somewhere.
Mhm.
Do we want it to be the right kind of refreshment? And the best way is for us to have filled it, especially early on. If we're filling it with the right content early on, they're going to get a taste for that. So that when someone
Yes.
pulls some negative stuff in it or some stuff they don't like, they're going to reject that. They might sip it and they might just dabble in it a little bit, but it's going to bother them. I'm not used to drinking this kind of stuff. I want something better. Yeah, it's kind of like if you go to a restaurant and you're getting a soda, you're getting a pop, soda, and the carbonation is off, and
Yes.
immediately, and you're like, oh gosh, and you pour it out. I don't want that. You lied to me. You told me this is what I was used to getting. I don't like that. Well,
Yes.
if you'd been given that uncalibrated carbonation mix all along and it was horrible, you didn't know that there was some good stuff out there. So,
Mhm.
as parents, we got to pour into them, pour into that stuff, especially early on.
Yeah.
Um,
No,
so, as our ability to pour in diminishes, and it will, because that's just part of growth,
yeah.
maturity, that they're still going to want that same content,
That's so good. No, I love
that
that. I
same
love
mix.
that, that example you gave. It's so good.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So, they're talking, they're
Yeah.
sharing with us, and then as a parent or as an adult teacher, we're going, "Uh oh, we got an issue here. Now
Mhm.
what do we do?"
Yeah.
I know what the instinct is for a lot of them is to freak out or maybe even try to solve it themselves. But what would be step one
Yeah, and
that
it's
you
funny
would
that you bring.
recommend?
Yeah, it's funny that you bring this up because we had this happen in our family, right? I'm the oldest cousin in my family, so I have some younger cousins. I have a 9-year-old. She just turned 10 today or yesterday, so that was awesome. But they're out in Texas, and she was going through some things, and the 10-year-olds, like, there's a friend out there that wasn't really, being a good friend to other people, but she really wanted to be her friend. And they had to figure out what this dynamic is because she didn't want to be friends with somebody that's unkind. My cousin doesn't want to be friends with somebody that's unkind, but this little girl really wanted her to be her friend because she treated her so kindly, right? And so my cousin, it was like, I don't want to be friends with you. I just don't want to be friends with you. I don't think this is going to be healthy. I don't want to be, attached to this type of unhealthy behavior or unkind behavior. So the little girl didn't like that she didn't want to be her friend. So she started to be rude to her and unkind to
Hmm.
her. So now there's this conflict happening between these young ladies. And my aunt calls me and says, hey, this is going on. I don't know what to do. Do I get involved? What should I do? And there are some instances where you just have a conversation with your youth and you say, this is more conflict mediation rather than mental health stuff, but I think it goes hand in hand. But sometimes our youth, just give them the tools. Hey, did you go talk to a trusted adult about this situation yet? Sometimes they'll say, no, I didn't want to be a snitch. I didn't want to be a rat. I didn't want to do this, that, or whatever, right? They said, okay, well, you know what? You're not a snitch or a rat for looking out for yourself and your other peers. So go talk to that trusted adult. And then see what happens, right? That's what we say. See what happens. And then if that still furthers on, go ahead and call the school social worker. And the reason why I don't have parents get involved right off the rip, if it's something that's not physical or emotionally abusive, is because our students and our youth need the skills and the coaching and mentoring to learn to navigate these conflicts by themselves. Because if you can't handle it in elementary school and you have somebody else stepping in as a trusted adult right off the rip, and when they become adults, they're not going to know how to manage it themselves. So we got to set them up for a world that we want them to grow up in and
Yeah.
flourish in. So I say that all to say the story ended with my aunt never got involved as far as talking to that young lady or talking to the other people's family. She got involved with the school and my little cousin, was able to figure it out together. And
Wow.
why I share that is because sometimes there's some points where we don't need to get involved. We just need to make the right phone call to the right people and not orchestrate it, but tell them what's going on, let them be aware, and give your youth the tools and skills to navigate that conflict in a healthy way. But when it comes to mental health challenges, it's scary. It can be
Yeah.
really scary, especially when we're talking about depression, when we're talking about suicidal ideation, when we're talking about anxiety. It's terrifying as a parent because you want to protect your kid. But one of the things I tell them is we can't panic, because if we panic, our youth panics and they think
Ooh.
there's something wrong with me. Oh my gosh, there's the thing that all the stories in my head are true. There's something wrong with me. But instead of panicking, I mean, my dad does a assist training. I don't know if you ever heard that, applied suicide strategies training. It's something that it's a rigorous training. It's really rigorous, and you're really practicing how to have dialogue with somebody who wants to take their own life, youth or adult, and the team mental
Right.
health first aid training as well. But the first thing they tell you to do is get comfortable asking that uncomfortable question. Hey, are you thinking about killing yourself? And it sounds counterintuitive, right? Because people believe that if I put that thought in their head, that they're going to do it. But believe it or not, when you ask somebody that, they don't want to die. Majority of the people and young people don't want to die, but they think that this is the only way to go about it. So
And
the reason,
last year during this month, I interviewed somebody from the president and CEO of Suicidology, and she
yes,
said that is something that you should never fear, is asking them for the reason that you just said of, oh, I'm going to put that idea in their head, because I guarantee you, if they are thinking of that, you did not put that thought there.
right, not
And
at
it's
all.
going to be the complete opposite effect if you're asking them. It doesn't put that idea in the head. It brings something that's in a dark place to light
Mhm.
so that we can begin to examine it.
Yes, and that's exactly where the point that I was going with that was like when we panic as parents, it sets our kids in a panic. But when we're
Mm.
calm and we're cool and we're collected and we have that tough conversation, it's not easy. It's not easy asking your young person, are you thinking about killing yourself? And then this is me taking it on a drastic measure, right? Because some of
Right.
these extremes are happening in our some of our parents' lives. But if you can get comfortable with the extremes and asking those tough questions, it becomes easier to navigate those little I'll say nuanced things, but those minor mental health challenges. So I say to parents and trusted adults is get involved in community. Reach out to those people that you know. Like I said, I'm one of those people in my family that when there's something's going on, my family knows I can call Z, and if he doesn't have the answers, I bet he'll find some resources that will help these families. So it's all about community. It's finding your community, and you didn't do anything wrong. I think parents think that if there's something wrong with my youth, it's because of something that I did, and that's possible, but it isn't your fault at all. It
Yeah.
isn't your fault at all. It's not a representation of who you are, but you're able to reach out and get those help that your youth deserves and that you deserve, it creates for a better dynamic.
So our audience is listening to us. They see that there's issue and they want to know more, and maybe
Mhm.
they want to connect with you more. How can they connect with you? Where can they find you in this world of online resources? Where can they connect with Z at?
Yeah, you can reach out to me, man, on social media, on Instagram. I'm really active there. That's where my one of my most active platforms. Facebook as well. You can follow me on Instagram at Zion underscore Givens, GIV as in victory, ENS. Or you can just type in my name and it'll pop up. It's the handsome black dude with a good smile. You'll see him come up. And then on
Zion Williamson won't pop
Oh,
up
right. No, no,
first.
no, no. That's what I get with the kids. The kids are like, oh, Zion, like Zion Williamson. I'm like, no, a lot more handsomer, a lot more handsome. But On Facebook, you can follow us on Up to It Parenting or the Up to It podcast. We also have a podcast where we go more in depth and teach parent have these conversations even more, to not shy away from these conversations and the ways that we did it as I was growing up. So if you're interested in that, you can follow us on anywhere you listen to the podcast at Up to It Parenting. We're just there to have some fun conversation.
Well, audience, if you want to find all those links, you can look in the show notes. If you're listening, go to your app. You'll find it there. If you're watching this on YouTube, you know the drill. You just kind of look down and there's a show more button or something. You click that and you'll see all that information there. So, Z, thank you for sharing this, diving into this topic, talking about these issues in such an open way. I appreciate so much our conversation today, and I admire and respect the calling that you have on your life to do this, because it is a calling. It's
Yes.
not, what we do in this area and this scene is not a vocation that you would go to career day on. They say, oh, you're going to be a youth advocate, and you're going to,
Right.
and there's not a table for that in the gymnasium.
No.
For that. This is a calling, something has spurred us on, and something new. So thank you for your commitment.
Well, thank you, James, for having me and seeing that in me. And I see it in you too. So, man, it was a pleasure to talk with you and to share with some knowledge that I have with your audience today. I appreciate it.
And audience, we want to thank you too for hanging with us for almost 45 minutes. If you've been with us this long, you have found some value in what we're talking about, or you let the podcast on by mistake and you forgot to cut it off. Whatever it is, we don't really care. Right. You're here. And we want you to do 3 things. And if you've stuck with me long enough, you know what I'm going to say. Number 1, we want you to comment. Number 2, we want you to like this thing. But most important that Z and I would love for you to do is share this, because there's somebody who needs to know this, and they don't know about this podcast. They don't know about Generation Youth. They don't know about Z. They don't know about any of this. But the conversations we had is going to maybe be a catalyst, a spark to help them in the right direction. So please share it. Please share. If you care about those people, please share it. So thank you for your time. Thank you, Z, and thank you, audience. We'll see you again very soon on another episode of the Generation Youth Podcast.